Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of the Victim podcast. We discuss a lot of sad and potentially triggering things on this show. We try to be as sensitive and cautious as possible, but if you are sensitive to things involving abuse and may be triggered, please think twice before listening to our show. Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. I'm Rosie.
And I'm Ryan.
And I'm starting to say that now.
Yes, you are. You're doing a great job of it. How are you doing, Rosie?
I'm good. I'm a little tired from work, but I'm doing okay.
Well, thank you for being here. Sorry my chair is so noisy. I really need to get a new chair someday. Hopefully soon. But before we get started, we want to thank our new patron, Christina.
Thank you so much, Christina. We appreciate your support.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. I just want to say thank you to all our patrons. You all mean so much to us. Thank you for sticking with us and your continued support. Before we get into the story, we have a little bit of a follow-up from last week. Last week's story was very uneasy and strange. If you haven't listened to it yet, you probably want to stop this and go listen to that first before you listen to this, because this will have spoilers.
Right.
So, know that you've been warned. But one of our listeners, Darcy, wrote to us on Instagram to share some of her perspective that we hadn't even thought about while we were recording. So, Rosie, do you want to read that?
Sure.
message?
And this is in response, I believe, partially to me saying that I had such a hard time with the adoptive parents not doing more. Darcy says, I just finished listening to the Katie Fusco case and just wanted to say, as someone who is adopted, one of the comments about the mother wanting to tell Katie the stuff that her father did to her as a child, I think the mother probably had resentment. She had to give her child away to protect her, and now she is coming back and forming a relationship with the man who was the reason why she, the mother, lost so much time she could have had with a child. I definitely had some resentment being adopted that I had to work through when I found my birth mother, and she also had 2 younger children. I think the mother probably just wanted a closer bond with Katie and felt that if Katie knew the truth about the adoption, maybe she would feel differently towards her father. And as far as her forming a sexual relationship with him, I think that as an adopted child, you go into these situations trying to navigate your feelings, and it seems that she probably was too impressionable. She was still very young and probably did not have the emotional capacity to realize that her father's feelings were inappropriate. She most likely wanted to form a bond and didn't want him to not like her. It's hard to explain, and kind of goes along with the nature versus nurture argument. When you find the people who created you, you can have a very intense feeling and likeness to them that you sometimes may not feel with your adoptive family. And I can just see how a young person could get confused when you seem to have so much in common with a man you do not know. If you could feel like an attraction to her, and instead of her father setting boundaries, he took advantage and made her feel that the bond was romantic instead of just a paternal bond.
This is a lot of stuff that I hadn't thought about or, didn't have the experience to really grasp. But this makes a lot of sense. And to go along with that, Robin over on Facebook had mentioned the term genetic sexual attraction, which kind of goes along with this. It's the phenomenon of intense attraction between biological family members that can occur after close relatives are reunited after a long period of separation. It's generally in families where they're separated at birth or from the very early life, which is exactly what happened here. And so, yeah, this is all stuff we had no idea about, and it just lines up with this story. It's a really weird thing to try to wrap your head around, but it's good to know about.
Yeah, I'm glad we did research even though it was after, not before.
Well, we can always do a follow-up in the next episode.
Right.
With that out of the way, we're going to move on to this week's story. And this was a suggestion from one of our listeners over on Instagram. So thank you so much for this recommendation. Tonight we're talking about Tia Sharp. So are you ready to dive into this, Rosie?
I am ready to dive.
All right. Tia Christine Sharp was born on June 30th, 2000 in Croydon, London, to Natalie Sharp and Stephen Carter. Her parents split up soon after she was born, and she went on to live with her mother. Natalie was very happy to have a baby girl. She was excited. She said Tia was like her Christmas present in the middle of summer. Now, Natalie's mom and Tia's grandma, her name was Christine Bicknell, and as Tia grew up, the three of them were like best friends, inseparable. Now, when Tia was just 2 years old, Natalie started to date a man named Stuart Hazel, but things didn't quite work out with them. It only lasted a couple weeks. But when they broke up, Natalie's mom, Christine, actually started dating Stuart, and I guess they got along a lot better than Stuart and Natalie had. They really seemed to make each other happy. So even though this was odd, Natalie was happy for her mom and didn't feel weird about it. Now, back to Tia, our main character. Tia was a very outgoing and outspoken girl with a strong presence. She was very smart, got good grades, but she did have a problem with attendance. And despite the great relationship she had with her mom, things weren't always perfect at home. There was an incident in 2008 when Tia was about 8 years old when someone reported Natalie for cannabis use. So Child Services actually showed up to the house to analyze this situation, and in their report they acknowledged that the family was unconventional and dysfunctional, but that it was a loving atmosphere and there was no abuse. So as the years went on, Natalie had 2 more children, baby boys. So Tia was the older sister to 2 little brothers now. And the family remained very close-knit, but Tia did have a hard time because they lived in such a small house. She had to share a room with her brothers.
Oh, lame.
Yeah. So oftentimes she would ask to go stay at her grandmother's house, Christine, and stay overnight where she had her own room. Plus they had a PlayStation, which... what kid doesn't love playing video games?
Me.
You had your little Star Wars game.
You're right. I did have a Star Wars game.
But Tia, she had also really started to love Stuart. She saw him as her own grandpa. Actually, for her 12th birthday, her mom and grandma were going to throw her a small party, and they said she could invite one friend. And rather than picking a friend from school or someone her own age, she actually said she wanted Stuart to come.
Aww.
So she truly loved him and saw him as her grandpa at this point. Now one day, Tia texted her grandparents to ask if she could come stay overnight. And this particular night, Christine was working the night shifts, so she wouldn't be there overnight. So instead of texting Tia back, Stuart texted Natalie to explain the situation and make sure it was okay with her first before he said yes to Tia. Now Natalie... she said it was fine, and they let Tia know, who was very excited, as usual, because she just loved going over there, having the extra space, playing games, and she just loved her grandparents. And I guess she probably had a bit more freedom as well. You know how
Oh, yeah. At Grandma's house, anything goes.
Yeah, they're a little softer than your parents, usually. So the next day was August 2nd, and that's the day Natalie drove Tia to a tram station, and Tia took the tram to where Stuart had planned to pick her up. And when she arrived, Stuart met up with her first, and then took her to a shop to pick out some snacks and food that she'd enjoy while she was there. Another exciting thing when you're a kid and you're going to someone else's house. Pick out your own snacks. So they did that, and then they left the shop and went back to the house. That evening, while at work, Christine called to see how things were going, and Stuart said it was going great. She could hear Tia in the background laughing and playing. Everything seemed to be going very well. Now the next day, at the end of Christine's shift, she returned home, but Tia wasn't there.
Now, how old is Tia again at this point?
She's 12.
She's 12. Okay.
So Stuart let Christine know that Tia went shoe shopping with a friend at the local shopping center, which I'm guessing is what they call malls in the UK.
Or maybe like a strip mall or something.
Yeah, something like that. A collection of shops. But she's shopping for shoes, and she would be back later. She's with a friend. But many hours came and went, and by 6 p.m., Tia still wasn't back. So this is when Christine began to worry naturally. She tried calling Tia, but there was no answer. Then she called Natalie to see if Tia had just gone home from the shopping center. But when they talked, they both realized that neither of them knew where Tia was and they couldn't get a hold of her. So, of course, they were really concerned. And Natalie met up with Christine and Stuart, and the three of them drove around searching for Tia. They hoped that she was maybe just out playing with a friend or something, which was reasonable because it's summertime. It doesn't get dark till 10 p.m., so it's a likely possibility.
Is it feasible that she could have gone home by herself, or was it a pretty far
away
location?
Natalie would have known.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you'd think Natalie would have had to pick her up at the tram station, too.
Right, yeah.
Unless a friend's mom or something brought her, but they had no luck with this search for hours, and finally at 10 p.m., when the sun was starting to go down, they realized they needed to call the police for help. Obviously, we wouldn't be talking about this if something didn't go horribly wrong. So they went down to the station, they filled out a missing persons report, and police learned that Stuart was the last person to see Tia, so naturally, they were interested in what he had to say.
Yeah, and he's not the biological grandparent either.
Yeah.
So it's not looking great for Stuart.
No. That's a interesting observation. So, when they interviewed him, he said that Tia had been with him all morning, he'd made her breakfast, and around noon, she left the house to go meet a friend at the shopping center in Croydon. Police actually also talked to one of Stuart's neighbors, Paul Meehan, who also said he'd seen Tia leaving the house around noon. So Stuart's story was corroborated by a witness. But the investigation still began with a search of the grandparents' home, and they found something there that they weren't expecting to. Tia's phone was there.
Oh.
So you see how that can be pretty odd?
That's... Yeah, you would think that Stuart would have been like, okay, now you have your phone, right? Before she went shopping.
You'd think. But like a 12-year-old girl, you know, she would probably be pretty stuck to her phone, wouldn't you think?
Mm-hmm.
And she's meeting up with a friend, so you'd think they'd need the phones to get in contact with each other once they were both there.
Right.
But I guess it is possible she just forgot.
You know what? It's not, though. Not for a 12-year-old girl.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, I nanny a 12-year-old girl, and she always has her phone on her.
Like, I don't know, because cell phones weren't a thing when I was 12. I didn't have a phone till I was 18. But
let me tell you. I mean, I'm texting my 12-year-old nanny kid.
Oh, yeah?
Well, not as we speak, but, like, she's always on her phone, so...
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and police also thought it was very odd. On the next day, Tia's disappearance started to get a lot of media coverage. It was out there, people were learning about it, and Natalie, Christine, and Stuart started to print up shirts, banners, and posters with Tia's face on them to spread awareness of her disappearance. Get the word out there. Hundreds of volunteers helped search for Tia, but sadly, day after day kept passing with no new information. 4 days into the search, Tia's uncle David went on national TV to make a public appeal for the safe return of Tia and ask for help from the public. Keep an eye out for her. And many tips started to pour in of possible sightings of Tia, but none of them led anywhere hopeful. Also during this time, police were collecting CCTV footage from all over the city of possible routes she could have taken to and from the shopping center that day. They ended up combing through over 800 hours of footage from around Croydon.
Whoa.
Can you imagine the manpower and time that would take? Like, they must have had a lot of people on this to be able to comb through 800 hours of footage.
Yeah.
But again, they didn't spot Tia even one time on that footage. The only footage they could find of her was from the day she met up with Stuart at the train station and then went to the food shop. Otherwise, she was nowhere to be found.
Well, it really seems like she didn't go anywhere.
But this was really confusing because both Stuart and his neighbor said that they'd seen Tia leave the house that day.
Well, that doesn't... Maybe the neighbor was in on it.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah, there's no hard evidence that she ever left the house. But at the same time, because of all the attention, public suspicion began to grow against Stewart, like yours is right now, I imagine.
Yeah.
So police wanted to make sure they weren't missing anything. So they set up another search of the grandparents' house, but this time with cadaver dogs.
Smart.
Who, you know, they're great at their job. They don't miss anything. But...
Nothing?
Nothing.
Really? Okay, I really did think that the cadaver dogs would get something.
I know.
Now I'm a little...
They're really good at their job. They can sniff out unbelievably concealed items.
Maybe I'm being just really negative towards Stuart, because, like, the minute you said it wasn't actually your grandpa, I was like, well, he did it.
Yeah. Well, the search, like you're saying now, the search should have seemed pretty conclusive. But still, public suspicion fell on Stewart. And he was getting annoyed by it. So he actually reached out to a TV station and agreed to do an interview to talk about Tia's disappearance and kind of clear his name.
You can't decide if that is being innocent or if that's being guilty trying to prove you're innocent.
Well, just wait till you hear this next part. Now, on August 9th, he appeared on TV and again begged for Tia's safe return. And he retold his story of that day, defending himself against the claims of suspicion. To do their due diligence, police did hire body language experts to take a look at the footage and get their thoughts on this interview.
The guy from YouTube.
Derek Van Schaik. I think this was a little before his time, but this is where things start to get weird. So I'm just going to say right off the bat, these are all things that the body language experts pointed out. So even though I'm fascinated by body language, I know I've talked about it a lot, how I have a hobby of watching Derek Van Schaik break down body language on YouTube.
Hey, we both do.
Yeah.
When I'm in the mood.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
But I'm not even close to educated on it. So that said, the experts noted that his body language was not exactly consistent with a typical concerned family member.
Before you go any further, can you give us like an idea of what he looks like? Like, can you give me a quick couple of stats about him?
Bald. Well, let me look him up.
For some reason, I'm picturing like a tall, thinnish guy with glasses and thick white hair.
He's a bit short in the tooth department, and...
Oh, wow. Okay, this guy looks way sketchier than what I had in my head.
Doesn't exactly look like the grandpa you were picturing?
I was picturing kind of like a Steve Martin type.
Oh.
For some reason.
No. When Tia was 2 years old, he was only like 27.
Okay.
So he's like 37 at this point. Even though he's dating Tia's grandma.
Yeah, I was imagining like this nice older gentleman.
I think Christine's a young, cool grandma.
Okay, well, now that I've seen what he looks like, which is borderline scary, I feel like he did it.
Well, I don't like to judge a book by its cover.
I know, but I'm super judging now.
Okay. Well, let's get back to the story.
Okay.
Like I said, they noticed he wasn't exactly consistent with a concerned family member that they would expect.
Okay.
They noted that he was overly animated. He was shrugging his shoulders a lot while he described events, which indicates self-defense, protecting the neck, you know. He added a lot of unnecessary details to pad out the story, and yet the story was always told linearly, like in the same order. When recalling memories, typically it's common for people to jump around to different parts as they recall details, but when it's rehearsed, it's almost always linear and nearly perfect. That's just the way it is. Another small detail is that they noticed that when he was telling the story, he'd look down and to the right, which often indicates using the creative left side of the brain.
Oh, interesting.
And typically when recalling a story, people will look up and to the left, indicating use of, the knowledge side of the brain rather than the creative side. Or they'll look around as if they were there again in person, recalling the events as they happened. So basically, looking down and to the right is congruent with concocting or creating a story.
Wow.
Rather than recalling a memory. He also seemed to be doing a lot more convincing than conveying while he spoke. And his blink rate also was about 40 to 45 blinks per minute, whereas a typical truthful person would blink 20 times per minute, which indicates nervousness. Now,
Dang.
of course, if he had just done one of these things, it could have been a coincidence. But all of these things together form a body language cluster, which makes it very likely that he's lying. So you were onto something, Rosie. But after consulting the body language experts, police let Stewart know they'd be back the next day for another search. That next morning, when Stewart and Christine woke up, he told her that he was going to go get the newspaper, and he left.
Yeah. Did he come back? I'm thinking that was his way to hit the road.
Wow, you are very perceptive. Well, once he left, she got out of bed, but as she walked through the house, she noticed a really weird smell that she hadn't noticed up until this point. She started searching everywhere, trying to find the smell. She looked in the fridge. She cleaned out the drains. She looked under furniture. She was trying to find where the smell's coming from, but she had no luck. And a few hours later, the forensic search team showed up, because this time, the first time it was just a regular search, the second time it was dogs. Now it's forensics, professionals at, really analyzing a scene. So the forensic team showed up, and Christine told them about the weird smell and took them to where she was smelling it. And when they smelled it, they instantly had a bad feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, a forensic expert is very familiar with different smells and what they mean. And this was not a good smell. The forensic team traced the smell up to the top of the house in the loft attic. Up there, they followed the smell to a very disturbing discovery. There was something wrapped in garbage bags and taped up tightly against the wall.
Taped against the wall? Seriously?
Well, it was taped up tightly and it was leaning against a wall.
Okay.
But when they opened it, they found a body wrapped in a bed sheet. And sadly, the body was so badly decomposed that it couldn't be identified visually. They actually ended up having to identify the body with dental records, and they did go on to discover that it was Tia.
Because roughly, how long was this after she went missing?
Okay, this was the day after the interview. She went missing on August 2nd, and she was discovered August 10th.
But it's hot. It's in the summer, and she's wrapped up in all those layers, so she would be badly decomposed.
Yeah. So, at this point in the story, I'm wondering how the heck the cadaver dogs missed this. I always thought police house searches were extremely thorough. So this is just mind-boggling. But eventually, the police department did get a lot of backlash for this. And they actually addressed it like, we really bungled this up to not find this in our first few searches. I think there were a total of 4 searches, actually. And it took 4 tries to find the body. Now, the cause of death couldn't be officially determined, and there was no evidence of any apparent cause. But they theorized that she'd been smothered with a pillow. Now, of course, I know I'm wondering what Stewart has to say about this, but I think you've already figured out what his plan was. At this point, they realized Stewart hadn't returned to the house since he left to pick up the newspaper hours earlier, which is obviously suspicious, especially being that he knew they were coming to search the house again that day. So London police put out a citywide alert to tell all officers and also the public to be on the lookout for Stewart Hazel, and he was easily recognizable because he had just been on the news the day before. There was a lot of media attention around the case. Now, a shop owner actually called into the police after this alert went out and told them that Stewart was in his shop, clearly intoxicated, and trying to buy more vodka. He was going around asking people for help to find his granddaughter and just seemed to be making a scene. And when the police arrived at the store, he was already gone. So they brought tracking dogs in, and they were able to follow his scent. I'm guessing they got it from the house, and that led them to a nearby park. And there they found Stewart in some bushes, laying on the ground and drinking vodka. So he was arrested on the spot, and soon after, the neighbor who'd corroborated Stewart's story, Paul Meehan, was arrested, and also Christine Bicknell, the grandmother.
Why was she arrested?
That's a good question. I'm guessing the fact that a dead body was found in her house, you know?
Yeah. I guess, but she, noticed the smell and...
Yeah, told them about it.
So I don't think...
That's a good point, and we'll talk about it a little later.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know why she was arrested. But I would imagine this is all happening really fast for the police. Mm-hmm. They didn't know what to expect when they started that search, and then this happened. So Stewart, Paul, Christine all suspected Paul for, interfering with the investigation, or maybe even being in on this. Who knows? And then Stewart for the murder. So Stewart was interviewed by police again, and this time he admitted that he had lied before. He told them he was too ashamed to tell the truth before now, but he said that the day Tia came over to his house, they were playing at the house when Tia suddenly tripped and fell down the stairs.
I'm not buying it.
Of course you're not. I didn't think you would. But he says he was high on cannabis and also drinking alcohol at the time.
It's a bad mix.
Yeah. He said he was so shocked by her falling down the stairs that he passed out almost immediately after she fell. I'm guessing mixing alcohol and cannabis, he had a green out. So he told police he woke up the next morning to find that Tia was still at the bottom of the steps and had died from her fall. Now,
and then he decided that the best option was to wrap her in a bed sheet and then put her in garbage bags in the loft.
Well, apparently he was so embarrassed by the fact that he'd been so inebriated at the time that he couldn't help her, and he couldn't bring himself to tell his wife, or I don't know if they were married, but he couldn't bring himself to tell Christine and Natalie about it. That's what he's saying. But obviously you're suspicious, Rosie.
Well, I think that's a really dumb plan.
Oh, yeah.
How would that not come out?
Right? It's extremely dumb and still extremely illegal. My first thought was that it's pretty odd that she wouldn't show any evidence of bruising when they were trying to determine the cause of death, and there were no...
She was so decomposed, remember? They couldn't even tell it was her.
Well, yeah, but you'd think there would be some kind of indication that there was blunt trauma if she fell down the stairs badly enough to die. Mm-hmm.
True.
I mean, the body can take quite a bit falling down the steps without dying, so it had to be pretty bad. But after hearing this story and talking to Christine, it was at least clear that she had nothing to do with Tia's disappearance, and she was actually able to post bail and get out of jail. But can you imagine, you're already in intense pain from your granddaughter being missing, then being arrested, spending a couple nights in jail, suspected of killing her? Like you were already saying, that had to be so awful for Christine and Natalie as this all unraveled.
Right. It does seem like Christine's making some weird life choices being with Stewart in the first place, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I don't like to judge people by their cover. It seems like he had the wool pulled over her eyes pretty well. Like, Christine, Natalie, and Tia all loved and adored him.
I guess the one thing I'll say about Stuart is, like, if this all was this insane accident and he really did panic this much, I guess that makes more sense of why he would be found drunk as a skunk at the park instead of running away.
That's a good point.
Wouldn't you think he'd run? Or maybe he's just really dumb, because, like, going to the liquor store and getting sloshed and asking people for more liquor, like,
yeah, when he knows what happened. Well, asking people to help him find his granddaughter.
Yeah, so
when he knows what happened to her.
That's just a weird chunk of the story to me.
It is, but the story is far from over.
Oh.
So, yes, he is dumb, and you'll see what I mean in this next part. While Stuart was talking to police, forensic experts were still searching the house, and in a door frame pushed into a small crack, they found an SD card. It was obvious that someone had attempted to hide it. Now, what's your first thought when you see a hidden SD card?
Porn.
Yeah. So when the card was searched...
Child porn.
When the card was searched, they recovered many files that had been deleted, but they were able to recover them. Mm-hmm. And, like you said, there's hundreds of images and videos, including pictures of young, obviously underage girls who looked like Tia, as well as ones of Tia herself. One video showed Tia sitting on a couch, putting lotion on her legs, having no idea she was being filmed.
Oh, no.
Other videos showed Tia asleep, and, like, anytime she would make a sound or move while she was sleeping, the camera would jump back and away.
Sure.
Obviously, the cameraman knew that this was wrong to be filming her in her sleep. And other videos revealed who this SD card belonged to. There were videos of Stuart pleasuring himself with a vibrator. So I'm sorry for putting that image in your head. But they actually found this vibrator during the search and sent it in for DNA analysis. And when it was tested, they found blood DNA, and it was a match to Tia.
Oh.
So it was clear from this SD card that Stuart was completely obsessed with Tia in a way that she had no idea of.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed that he'd used his vibrator on her while sexually abusing her. And it's unclear if he did this before or after he took her life. But either way, either he killed her to cover up what he had done, or he killed her just so he could abuse her body. And there were more images found on the SD card of Tia posed in sexual positions, which investigators believed were taken post-mortem.
Oh, wow. That's terrible.
So, obviously, Stuart's even more messed up than you thought a few minutes ago. Initially, he pleaded not guilty to this, of course, but finally on May 13th, 2013, he changed his plea to guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And his parole wouldn't be for 38 years.
Whoa.
So that's when he's 75. Like, chance of parole.
Right.
That doesn't mean he'll get out.
Yeah.
But, I mean, even that, I don't know why there's a chance of parole to begin with. Because this is obviously really, really messed up. Like, we don't know the details of exactly everything that happened. And even if I did, I wouldn't want to talk about them on this podcast.
No.
But it's clear that he had some very disgusting secrets from Christine, and he just allowed them to grow and grow in his brain until he couldn't help from acting on it. Because apparently his outer persona to the whole family was very loving and caring, and you know, just Tia loved him.
I wonder if he started dating Christine after, like, following Tia around, or, like, noticing,
well,
you know?
Tia was only 2-year-old. She was a baby when he started dating Natalie. And then, like, he watched Tia grow up. Tia grew up around him, seeing him as her grandpa. So
Yeah, ish.
it's really sad.
Doesn't say how long was he planning on doing this.
Yeah, that's... Or was he planning on doing it? Or was he just planning on keeping it a secret, but he just couldn't control himself that one night? I don't know, but I would guess that he didn't want to kill her. Like, he probably just hoped that she would be okay with him abusing her, and maybe she wasn't, because, you know, she was known as a very outspoken girl, so maybe she didn't react the way he wanted her to when he tried to rape her, and because if she was smothered with a pillow, that would make a lot of sense.
Ish.
Now, the neighbor, Paul Meehan, was also found guilty of wasting police time for this false corroboration, and he was sentenced to 5 months in prison, which I don't know how that happened. It's really weird. Like, why would he lie to the police like that unless Stewart maybe asked him to?
That's kind of bizarre. Like, what if he was like doing something too?
Yeah. And Tia's father, Stephen Carter, has come out since all of this and told media sources that he felt guilty for not being around for his daughter while she was growing up, because he felt, you know, maybe he could have prevented this if he was there for her. So that's really sad. But he actually started to publicly back up a plan for search websites to block certain search terms and warn people when they were trying to view illegal content, which Google and Bing eventually adopted. So I guess that's good, because, you know, who knows how long Stewart was feeding this weird addiction he had with... Did I mention that when they searched his internet history, they found a lot of search terms for, like, child pornography and stuff like that?
Like, just on Google and stuff?
Well,
what
wherever
do you mean exactly?
On the internet. I'm sure a plethora of sites, but he had been looking up and viewing child porn on the internet. So I think that's something I forgot to put into the outline, but yeah, he was obviously feeding this obsession and allowing it to grow with this. So, you know, Stephen Carter, Tia's father, wanted to make sure that he did something about this problem. So that's really cool of him. But anyway, that's all I got. Just, I can't imagine being Natalie and Christine, thinking you know this guy, trusting him and loving him, and he's sitting there this whole time alongside you, pretending to help find her, and the whole time he knows what happened to her. It just is such a betrayal.
Well, and I wonder, like, was Tia the only girl that this happened to?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he had downloaded those other images from the internet, or if he took them, or what. Anyway, that's where we'll wrap up this story. Do you have anything else to say about it, Rosie?
Well, I can't be frustrated with the family or anything. He'd been around for so long. He was he was her grandpa. 2. So, I for one thing, I can't believe that Christina was arrested. I mean, unless for some reason they did feel like she was guilty, other than they were in a panic and there was so much new information that they just, like, didn't know what to do. Yeah,
I don't know. Well, I'm sure she was in shock and disbelief too, because up to this point, she completely trusted and believed in him. She slept in the bed next to him just hours before this all came out. So
I just feel so bad that she must have felt so guilty, and that must have just...
And shocked and betrayed. I can't even imagine. It's probably an overwhelming mix of emotions that she experienced. And, I don't know what else to say about it.
Interesting. I did have a feeling it was Stewart all along, though.
I know. I could tell. Well, I mean, as soon as you hear she's going to stay the night at his house, I mean, obviously this is a true crime podcast. We only talk about terrible things. And when a 12-year-old girl's going to stay overnight at her not related grandpa's house, which, based on what we did last week or the personal stories, listener stories we've shared lately, doesn't really matter who it is.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because he was like not biologically his grandfather or her grandfather, and then she went to stay the night without grandma being home, I instantly was like, he did it.
Yeah, especially since there's always something terrible that happens in our podcast. But
yeah, but that's not the case. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of wonderful grandfathers that aren't biologically grandfathers.
Yeah.
You know,
of course there are. I mean, Stuart was obviously living a double life, pretending to be this person he wasn't, and then secretly harboring this second personality because he had everyone fooled that was close to him. And that's the scariest kind, I think, to me, is people who are fake on the outside and hiding this terrible secret. Okay. Have you said everything you want to say about this?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Do you want to read this review we got from Lonely Lou on Apple Podcasts?
I sure do. This review is titled, Nice Couple, Interesting Show. Very solid. I said that. Lonely Lou says, this podcast is interesting. They try to cover true crime that isn't so well known, which is nice. I wanted to let the host know that I like it when he reads versus when she reads. Her voice is more soothing than his, obviously. But she has a hard time pronouncing words and saying names correctly. True. And that takes away from the story a bit. But all in all, I like both the hosts, their stories, their empathy and banter. Oh, and don't forget the cat, LOL. I think they have 2, and they are always bugging them, which is hilarious. We have 3, but Quesadilla is usually in the shadows.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because while we were recording this, Burrito kept trying to walk on my keyboard, which always runs the risk of stopping and then deleting the recording.
Well, we started with no cats in the room, but when they start putting their paws under the door and meowing
really loud,
then we have to let them in.
Yeah. It's fun recording with cats, but sometimes it's a little like, okay, we have a job to do here.
They're just not very understanding.
So thank you, Lonely Lou. I really appreciate that. And thank you for the feedback on this new format we have. Obviously, we just started this last week, so I'm still trying to learn how to read well. And I think we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because we've gotten some good feedback about it. And I think just in general, the recording goes smoother.
It does, actually.
And we're better suited for these roles. Like, since I researched, I know what's coming. I can read it properly. And you should be in the reaction role because you're the person who's experienced, well, people know your personal story. So I think it makes sense, these roles for us now. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our patrons again. We really appreciate you. If you want to help support the show and get some bonus content, there's over 20 premium episodes over on Patreon now. We'd really appreciate the support.
Yes, we would.
Even if you don't care about that and you just want to help the show, that would really mean a lot. It really helps a lot for us to make the show as good as it can be. So, that said, I think we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so.
So, you have anything else to say before we go, Rosie?
I'm going to try to wash off my tie-dyed hands.
Oh, yeah, it looks like you had quite the project today.
Tie-dye with 3 kids.
Rosie's blue fingers.
I have, like, Hulk hands.
Yeah.
My littlest guy was hogging the blue.
Well, he's a huge fan of the Hulk, isn't he?
He is.
Does he try to paint himself like Hulk?
Well, he got it all over his hands, too, and then when he realized he couldn't get it off in like a minute, he started crying. So
sounds about right.
Very neat.
That's how it goes. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.